Everyone, and welcome back. Let's go ahead and let's talk about something a little bit happier in light of everything going on right now than prejudice and aggression. Let's talk about altruism. Let's talk about, well, this one isn't as happy, conflict, and let's talk about peacemaking. Now, what is altruism? Altruism is an unselfish concern for the welfare of others. For example, we see this type of action by others in both daily life and in extreme situations. One example your book shares is of a man named Carl Wilkins, who had been a Seventh-day Advent missionary. He was living there in 1984 with his family when Hutu militia began to slaughter the Tutsi in Kigali, Rwanda. The U.S. government, church leaders, and friends all implored Wilkins to leave the area. He refused. After evacuating his family, and even after other Americans had left Kigali, he alone stayed and contested the 80,000-person genocide. When the militia came to kill him and his Tutsi servants, Wilkins' Hutu neighbors deterred them. Despite repeated death threats, he spent his days running roadblocks to take food and water to orphanages, and to negotiate, plead, and bully his way through the bloodshed, saving lives time and time again. He later explained that it just seemed like the right thing to do at that point in time. Your book also talks about a man named Paul Rusabat Bangdia, who protected a group of 1,200 Tutsi people during an attack in Rwanda. He sheltered people at risk to himself and went above and beyond to ensure their safety during this period. Even as international peacekeepers abandoned the city and hostile militia threatened his guests in the hotel in Rwanda, he cashed in on favors, bribed the militias, and telephoned influential people abroad to exert pressure on local authorities, thereby sparing the lives of his hotel occupants. Altruism, not only do these incidents highlight altruism became a major focus for social psychologists, primarily after the death of a woman named Kitty Genovese, who had called for help and none of the people around her responded to her screams. Social psychologists attributed this lack of action to an important situational factor. Now, the New York Times reported that about 38 people had heard her scream, although this number has been contested. And this is an important factor in why nobody went and helped the presence of others. In order for us to determine if we need to provide assistance in an emergency, 3 factors need to be accounted for in our decision. The first is that the situation that's happening must enable us to notice the incident. If we can't notice that the incident is helping, there is no way for us to decide if this needs our assistance. The second thing is that situation must be interpreted as an emergency. We have to interpret that is an emergency, and that is something that we need to act immediately. Finally, we must assume responsibility for the action of helping itself. At any point in time, if any of these are regarded as a no, if we don't notice the incident, if we don't interpret the incident as an emergency, if we don't assume responsibility for the action of helping, we won't assist. And at each step, the presence of others can turn us from the path of helping. This is known as the bystander effect, or the tendency for any given bystander to be less likely to give aid if other bystanders are present. We can actually talk about this more in an experiment that was done by a man named Darley and another man named Latane. They reached their conclusions after interpreting the results of a series of experiments. One example, they simulated a physical emergency in their laboratory as students participated in a discussion over an intercom. Each student was in a separate cubicle, and only one person whose microphone was switched on could be heard. When his turn came, one student, who was a Confederate, made sounds as somebody who is in the know about the experiment, made sounds as though he were having an epileptic seizure and called for help. Now, how did the other students react? How did they use use this system for interpreting. Those that believed that only they could hear the victim, and therefore that they were alone and responsible for helping him, usually went to his aid. Students who thought that others could hear the victim's cries were more likely to ignore said victim. When more people shared responsibility, when there was a diffusion of responsibility, any single listener was less likely to help. Another experiment occurred. For example, was having researchers and assistants take about 1,500 elevator rides in 3 cities and accidentally either dropping coins or pencils in front of about 5,000 fellow passengers. When alone with a person in need, about 40% of people helped. When in groups of 5, that percent dropped to 20%. Now, our observations and behavior in thousands of situations, relaying an emergency phone call, aiding a stranded motorist, donating blood, picking up dropped books, contributing money, giving time, all of these have the best odds of us helping someone when the person appears in need and deserves help to us. If they appear like they need help and that they deserve help, we are more likely to help. The person is in some way similar to us. Height, sex, gender, hair color, anything that makes a person more like you are more likely to help that person. This is most likely because of the whole in-group, out-group thing we have talked about previously. We are more likely to help if that person is a woman, or if we have just observed somebody else being helpful. If we aren't in a hurry, we are more likely to assist. If we are in a small town or a rural area where there's less people around us, we are more likely to help. If we are feeling guilty, we are more likely to help someone. If we are focused on others and are not preoccupied, we are more likely to assist. And if we are in a good mood, we are definitely likely to assist. And that last result, that happy people are helpful, is one of the most consistent findings in psychology. As poet Robert Browning observed, "Oh, make us happy and you make us good." It doesn't matter how we're cheered up, by the way. Whether it's made to feel successful and intelligent, thinking happy thoughts, by finding money, or receiving some type of post-hypnotic suggestion, we become more generous and more eager to help when we are in a good mood. And actually, given our feeling of elevation after witnessing or learning of somebody else's self-giving deeds, our helping will become even more pronounced. Now, while happiness breeds helpfulness, the reverse itself is also true. Making charitable donations activates brain areas associated with rewards. This explains actually a curious finding. People who give money away are happier than those who spend it almost entirely on themselves. In one experiment, researchers gave people an envelope with cash and instructions to either spend it on themselves or to spend it on others. Those who helped, those who were assigned on the spend it on others condition, were happier than those who treated themselves. So, why do we help? Why do we even assist other people? There are multiple reasons and multiple theories as to why we assist. One idea is that our own self-interest underlies all our human actions. That our constant goal is to maximize reward, minimize cost. Accountants call this cost-benefit analysis. Philosophers call it utilitarianism. Social psychologists call this social exchange theory. The theory that our social behavior is an exchange process, the aim of which is to maximize benefit and minimize cost. Others believe that we help because we have been socialized to do so, through norms that prescribe how we ought to behave. Through socialization, we learn what's known as a reciprocity norm, an expectation that the people will help, not hurt, those who have helped them in the past. Now, for example, this reciprocity norm kicked in after a man named David Tolley, an Arizona homeless man, found $300 in a backpack that had been lost by an Arizona State University student heading to buy a used car. Instead of pocketing the cash for needed bike repairs, food, and shelter, Talley actually turned the backpack into the social service agency where he volunteered. To reciprocate Talley's help, the student thanked him with a reward. And hearing about Talley's self-giving deeds, dozens of others actually sent him money and job offers. Now, another type of norm that could explain altruistic behaviors is what's known as a social responsibility norm. That an expectation people will help those needing their help, even if costs outweigh the benefits. Now, one group that fulfills this social responsibility norm is people who attend weekly religious services. They are often asked to practice this social norm, and according to survey results, they do give twice as many hours in volunteering compared to those who rarely attend religious services. Now, while positive social norms encourage generosity and enable group living, conflicts often divide us. To social psychologists, a conflict is a perceived incompatibility of actions, of goals, or of ideas. The elements of conflict are pretty much the same, whether it's as big as a nation at war or as small as two friends fighting. In some situations, we support our own collective well-being by pursuing our own personal interests. In other situations, we can harm others by pursuing our own self-interest, and including ourselves in situations called social traps. This is where both parties seeking their own self-interests become caught in mutually self-destructive behavior. There are many real-life situations that pit our individual interests against our communal well-being. Take overfishing, for example. Some people will fish for catches they shouldn't for fear that they'll be unable to acquire it in the future. Social traps challenge us to reconcile our own well-being over that of others. Another one, this social trap can be best exemplified by what's known as a social trap game matrix. Both sides can win or lose depending upon each player's individual choices. In this example picture above me, we have Malik and Frank, who are both going to be in solo interrogation for a crime they committed. Neither of them knows what the other has answered. Now, if Malik were not to trust Frank and confesses that Frank did the crime, and Frank were to trust Malik and did not confess to either's involvement, then only Frank would get 30 years of prison. This would be a similar case if Frank confessed that Malik committed the crime, and Malik did not confess that Frank committed the crime. If both confessed to the other's involvement in the crime, they would both get 10 years. If they both did not trust each other, they would both get 10 years in prison. Now, if both acted in mutual cooperation and trust by not confessing, then they would both get 3 years, the shortest potential sentence. Many individual real-life situations pit our own individual interests against communal well-being. This social trap game is something that has been studied and tried and presented in different contexts in psychology, some looking at trust, some looking at trust, some looking at these social traps, for example. Will a person look after their own well-being, or will a person look out for other people's well-being? But what's important is what they elucidate by the social trap. By potentially acting in your own self-interest, you could be hurting yourself more rather than acting from a communal standpoint. Now, one part of the conflict is the distorted image that enemies have of one another. These distorted images can be so similar that these are referred to as mirror image perceptions. Each side seeing themselves as either good, while the other side is bad. This can change our behavior, leading to what's known as a self-fulfilling prophecy, in which a person behaves the way that they were expecting in response to our behavior. For example, we believe a person's rude, so we treat them poorly. When they get upset in response, this can potentially reaffirm our belief that that person is rude, whenever it was actually our behavior that influenced them to act this way. These self-fulfilling prophecies can also occur because we tend to see our own actions as responses to provocations, not the cause of what happens next. Next is the same thing you hear with little children. Little children don't think about hitting their siblings. They think of hitting their siblings, making their siblings cry and fight. They think about it as a response to what had been previously done to them. Now, this means that those we often consider enemies often have a mirrored perception similar to ours. We're bad, we're good, they're bad. And then the other side has that same perception of I'm good, they're bad. This can feed cycles of hostility, especially in whether this is in small friend groups or on the world stage itself. And it's important to note that the truth isn't that it must lie somewhere between the two views. One may be more accurate. But the point is that enemy perceptions often form mirror images. And moreover, as enemies change, so do our perceptions of what was once an enemy. So let's talk about peace. How can we make peace? What methods will help whenever it comes to repairing peaceful relations? Now, does contact help warring parties? Yes, it depends on the situation, though. If the contact is non-competitive and between parties of equal status, it can help a lot in repairing peace. However, contact itself is not always enough, as mirroring beliefs about the other party can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. Example, one party wants to make amends but thinks the other does not reciprocate that belief whenever they do. They just mirror the belief, so they think that the other party doesn't want to make amends, and it just leads to a massive he shed, she shed problem. Contact generally helps if the contact is non-competitive and the parties are of equal status. It can help a lot in repairing peace. Now, does cooperation help warring parties? Yes, but again, it depends on the situation. When warring parties have superordinate goals, these are shared goals that require us to overcome differences and work together to complete them. Both parties can overcome past differences and malice if it is something that every individual in those parties wants. What reduced the conflict was not just contact, but cooperative contact, not competitive contact. This can create a potential new group from previous subgroups. Now, what about communication? Can communication help warring parties make peace? Yes. Potentially with the help of a mediator, a neutral third party. These mediators help each party to voice their own viewpoint, while also allowing for understanding of each other's needs and goals. If successful, mediators can replace a competitive win-lose situation with a cooperative win-win one and help people to work together, similar to that cooperation that we just saw between the warring parties. Now, can conciliations help warring parties make peace? Yes, absolutely, actually. Now, conciliations help both parties begin edging down their tensions through small gestures and a declaration of mutual interest in an intent to reduce tensions. Remember those social norms we talked about in altruism? These reciprocity norms and social responsibility norms? They have a major part in helping conciliations work. They open the door, these conciliatory gestures, something as simple as an I'm sorry, something as simple of an I don't want to fight, I want us to be friends, things like that. Open the doors for reciprocal gestures without taking away any of their options, without taking away their ability to potentially retaliate. It allows us to edge down tensions enough to where actual discussion can begin. Now, what's important for us to realize is that as working towards shared goals reminds us, we're more alike than we are different. We are all people. We all have civilization advances not via conflict and cultural isolation, but by tapping the knowledge, the skills, and the arts that are in each culture's legacy to forward the entirety of the human race. Advances are not made in this state of conflict and isolation, but by cooperation and by us keeping hope. However, that's about what I have for this week. I recognized this week that there was an issue with some of the submissions, by the way, for one of the past week's homeworks. I have remedied that. So if you had issues submitting that homework, please go ahead and do so. But with that, I will see you guys next week. Have a good rest of your week.